All right, well, let's get started with our webinar. We are going to be dealing with 2016 predictions today in a wide variety of topics across the industry, including VoLTE, VoWiFi, 5G, IoT, hiring trends, and a whole lot more. So thank you for joining us. I'm Kelly Hill, editor with RCR Wireless News, and I'm joined today by Martha DeGrasse, also an editor with RCR Wireless. We also have Roger Entner, founder and analyst for Recon Analytics, Chris Pearson, president of 4G Americas, Christopher Cave, director of R&D for Interdigital, and we have Justin Hart, senior director for system engineering and architecture at Sonus. So welcome to our participants, and we hope to give you folks a lot of good discussion today. Just a few things from the news this week relevant to the topics that we're going to be discussing today. We recently had T-Mobile US say 1/3 of its calls are being carried over voice over LTE, a pretty interesting ramp up. Verizon this week rolled out a software update to enable Wi-Fi calling on the Samsung Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge. We recently had some expanded test equipment offerings for 5G R&D, supporting that ecosystem. During the month of November, the World Radio Communications Conference of the ITU ended not only with a number of other developments, but with study items for potential 5G spectrum above 6 gigahertz. We had Nokia and Telecom Italia announcing a 2-year partnership to invest in SDN and NFV startups. And then we also had some rumblings this week about the controversy over LTE-U continuing, with Google, Comcast, and Microsoft continuing to lobby the FCC against LTE-U, which, as a reminder, is the rather proprietary standard being developed through the LTE-U forum. Available today on rcrwireless.com, we have our 2016 predictions special report that's available for download. A few key takeaways from that report: technologies such as VoLTE, VoWiFi, and SDN and NFV will continue to mature in 2016. Interoperability is going to be key for some of those things, particularly as it comes to VoLTE. New technologies are also going to be emerging, and as far as LTE-U, we do expect to start seeing deployments during 2016. We'll also start seeing some of the first formal standardization efforts being put together for 5G with study items from 3GPP. On the regulatory side, we'll see the year shaped by the presidential election, the 600 megahertz spectrum auction, and carriers figuring out how to play by net neutrality rules. I'd also like to ask Martha to give us some of her key takeaways.
Thanks, Kelly. My updates concern wireless workforce trends, centralized RAN, and IoT. On the wireless workforce front, we see that on balance, carriers and some of their suppliers may be likely to reduce headcount or at least not add in 2016. Again, that's on balance. There certainly will be individual companies hiring, but we know that Sprint has said it will have to cut back. Verizon is consolidating its regional markets. On the chip side, we know that Qualcomm has some layoffs ongoing, and there is also, of course, consolidation going on. Nokia just completed the Alcatel-Lucent acquisition, which may or may not result in some layoffs. On the bright side, the companies that build wireless infrastructure are ramping up. There's anticipated a lot of hiring from a lot of these companies, particularly around network densification efforts in 2016. And related to that, companies that were not previously part of the traditional wireless ecosystem are likely to sort of become part of it in 2016, particularly with in-building deployments where technicians that have more of an IT background will become involved in some Wi-Fi and small cell type deployments. Also outdoor utility fiber type workers are getting involved in some of these outdoor small cell and DAS deployments as well, and that's bringing new people into this ecosystem. Centralized RAN is a trend that is also picking up. Centralized RAN has a lot more traction right now, we think, than cloud RAN, the difference being the ownership of the RAN equipment. We've already seen instances where two carriers will share, for example, a DAS headend, and that's expected to pick up in 2016. And of course, the companies that make this equipment, the DAS vendors, are pushing hard for this, as of course are the tower companies and the neutral host providers. Internet of Things is expected to be a major trend in 2016. Already, the amount of activity in this space in the past 3 months probably exceeds what was seen in the first of 2015 altogether. And it will probably be the year that a lot of devices that were not previously economic to connect to the internet will be able to be connected due to the proliferation of more low-power wide area networks from vendors like Sigfox. Sigfox has already announced 10 cities where it's going to roll out its low-power wide area network. The wireless equipment vendors, of course, are rushing to keep up and not to lose market share, and LTM for machines is the solution that is likely to get a lot more development this year. And then there are other solutions out there as well, though. And Verizon had an interesting announcement earlier this month with Saquon's and Altair for their IoT initiative. So look for the wireless carriers to move quickly in IoT in 2016, we think.
Okay, great. Well, Roger, we're going to toss it over to you and give us your outlook for next year.
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I would like to start out with the U.S. handset market. It's kind of a very interesting year today because the rapid growth of smartphone is probably going to peak this year. I'm expecting somewhere around 141 million devices sold. Of that, roughly 131.7 million or smartphones will be flat around 128 million. That is like the first time that we see smartphones topping out, and next year will probably be a slight decline. Feature phones are remarkably strong. A lot of us, including me, thought this year would be a much steeper decline with almost none next year, but I don't think that will actually happen. The handset replacement rate is creeping up. For 14, it was 26.5 months, and this year will be 26.8, creeping up next year probably to about 28 months. So with that, it's a very interesting counterpoint to that rapid rollout of new features that we see that really require a new handset. VoLTE is becoming mainstream, and when you, I think more and more of us are seeing it as both VoLTE has become nationwide at almost every wireless carrier, and we're about to see interoperability come, that you suddenly have a much better connection. But that only works if you have a newer phone. And the market for phones has basically bifurcated, where you have about 45–48% of the population upgrading every year, and maybe 5–10% on the 2-year time frame, and everybody else waits before the phone breaks. And that is a very transformative event, because half of the population almost is getting left behind or very slow to all the innovations that we're seeing. As mentioned before, LTE-U and LAA are coming, but not in 2016. So you will have a lot of trials, more tribulations. You will have a lot of the companies that have built their business on Wi-Fi trying to defend it in unlicensed spectrum, the definition of you can use whatever you want to use in that spectrum, and suddenly they want to make it even more protected, which would be a very dramatic departure from the FCC's technological agnosticism, where it basically doesn't tell anybody what technology they should use, but people can do that and decide that on their own. And it would be a very interesting departure because the rest of the world doesn't really have the same concerns that some of the companies that build their business on Wi-Fi have here in the US. When we look at how will the carriers perform next year, overall, we'll see about very similar net adds for the industry as we have seen this year, a little bit industry-wide on phones, or about 3 million or so. In terms of tablets, more in the neighborhood of 14, 15 million. Sprint, I think, will be the very interesting story this year because their Spark markets are finally being ready. And they will spend a lot of focus on having really, really fast speeds. Roughly, I see here in Boston somewhere between 35 and 45, and when I travel, it's not that much different if you're in the Spark market. And that is a significant difference to what the other carriers are offering, and they will probably play down to this. I don't think T-Mobile has any reason to change their current playbook because it works out very well. Churn is coming down at T-Mobile, and we all listened to what I thought was very interesting at the UBS conference, where T-Mobile said that growth might flatten out. I think they will, from being on a tier or on a tear, they will still rip, but maybe on a lesser focus or attempt. When we look at AT&T, I think we see a lot of focus on integrating and bringing DirecTV to the table and use that for video. Verizon, as Lowell said at the Goldman Sachs event, it will be a flat revenue year, and I think they're rebuilding right now. They have reorged their regional structure, a regional and area structure, and probably prepare for quite the 2017. And we saw just today Lowell announcing that they will have even faster internet up to gigabit per second, probably with carrier aggregation. So very exciting, lots of things going on. And with that, I'll hand back.
Great, Roger, thank you so much. We're going to move on now to Chris Pearson, President of 4G Americas. Chris?
Great, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I really appreciate RCR putting on this webinar, and it's a great honor to be part of it. So next slide. So to start out, if you look at 2016, I think it's a very exciting time for not just the current technologies that are in place, but it's a very exciting time for LTE that's in place and actually growing and maturing. So when we look at the forecast for 2016, we are very bullish on LTE networks and subscribers. We're looking at in 2016 to hit over 490 networks worldwide. We also expect over 1.45 billion LTE connections worldwide, and you're going to see a gradual, continual momentum of an increase to operators that are upgrading their networks from LTE to LTE Advanced, and we're predicting over 150 LTE Advanced networks will be in place in the next year. Next slide. But there's also a story here about LTE and its progress. I know that the buzzword in the industry is 5G, and a lot of heightened attention on 5G. But LTE Advanced has an amazing technology innovation roadmap. And so far, of the carriers that have deployed LTE Advanced features, they pretty much have keyed on one, and that is carrier aggregation. But what you're going to see, we believe, in 2016 is a more mature LTE Advanced capabilities, and you're going to see operators looking at and deploying with their vendor partners more of the features that are part of the LTE advanced capabilities and not just carrier aggregation. And this will lead to continued improvement in performance, improvement in flexibility, and also even just the whole idea of innovation and creativity where there's a lot of features that can be deployed. Next slide. Another key trend that we see is the fact that the Internet of Things marches on. And I'll just talk about a couple or about 4 statistics that we researched that came out from leading research firms. First, McKinsey Global Institute, by 2025, they expect 50 billion connected devices or nodes representing $6 trillion of incremental business. 2, IDC, they predict the global Internet of Things market will grow to $1.7 trillion in 2020, and that they predict the number of IoT endpoints, connected devices, such as cars, refrigerators, and everything in between, will grow to from 10.3 billion in 2014 to more than 29.5 billion in 2020. And let me give you one more. Gartner, they expect that the market for IoT devices will reach nearly 21 billion connected devices by 2020. So what I'm trying to say here is it's a staggering, these are staggering examples or forecasts by leading research firms that are showing what the opportunity is in IoT. And I believe that in 2016, you will see that the Internet of Things will continue to make great progress, and there's going to be more industries and more businesses out there opening up their minds, their wallets, and their overall corporate strategy to the Internet of Things. And that trend is just now starting to gain momentum, and we'll see it in 2016. Next slide, please. And for our industry, the mobile cellular industry, I think you're going to see a lot of IoT standardization progress. There is a lot of competition that is out there in the marketplace, and a lot of different ways to have an IoT strategy, depending on what your own corporate strategy is or what vertical industry is in. But the decision by 3GPP to work to standardize what would be called narrowband IoT is really a critical decision as this competition increases throughout the world. Because what I think you're going to see with the new standard and the standards that have been continually be worked on in the past year or so is a real balancing act of balancing the complexity, the cost, the coverage, and the battery life so that it can reach into more markets and serve more IoT markets. Next slide. Also, I think it's very interesting to consider how much work is being done on 5G in the pre-standardized phases. And I think you're going to see a more and more understanding and work at 3GPP as well as 4G Americas and other organizations to fully realize that we need to make sure that we continue to build on 4G while at the same time evolve to 5G. If there are features and techniques that can be done at the 5G level, I don't think operators and their vendor partners are going to want to wait for them till 2020 and beyond. I think you're going to see them incorporated more and more into the LTE Advanced or LTE Advanced Pro standardization. Next slide, please. And that gets over to the overall 5G technology concept. I think 2016 is a big year for all the operators, vendors, associations, and key partners to come together and really come out with kind of more of a settling in on the overall concept of 5G. I think there's been great progress in the last 2 years. I know 4G Americas has worked hard with other associations on that progress, but I think you're going to see a lot more in 2016. If you look at commercial standardized deployments, now these would be, again, commercial standardized deployments, they're probably about 2020 and beyond. So it's a long ways out, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I actually believe that in 2016, you're going to see a lot of heavy lifting between the associations the standardization groups and operators and vendors throughout the world. Next slide. And that leads us to our industry growing at such a rapid rate and how we look at spectrum to serve those needs. Technology is one aspect, and technology innovation another aspect of moving the ball forward and utilizing spectrum more efficiently. But I think in 2016 and beyond, our industry is going to continue to look at new and innovative ways to use spectrum. And as we look at 5G, we're going to be looking much more closely at all the different aspects of spectrum. Number one, we need more exclusive use licensed spectrum for our industry. But also, we're going to have to open up our minds, and I think you're seeing this in the 5G and now even in 4G, to look at using shared spectrum, unlicensed spectrum, low band spectrum, mid band spectrum, and high band spectrum. I think everything needs to be on the table to meet that insatiable demand that we have, which is the mobile broadband demand in society. Next slide, please. Another trend that we see is high band spectrum planning. At the recent WRC, there was a lot of progress made by governments around the world in discussing and trying to come to consensus on what bands need to be studied for 5G high band spectrum. But there's a lot of progress that still needs to be done. And I think that if you start to look at the individual governments, you're going to see individual governments kind of move a bit deeper into the planning process for 5G high band spectrum. We've already seen this in the United States when in October of this year, the FCC took the steps to issue an NPRM to get a better understanding for high band spectrum. And I think you're going to see similar types of moves around the world as governments want to take a lead in the kind of deeper planning of 5G high band spectrum. Next slide, please. And finally, there's a lot of competition out there in the world, no matter what industry you're in. But I truly believe, if you look at 2016 and even beyond, that when we look at the mobile broadband connectivity, and that's smartphones and connected cars and tablets and so forth, I really believe that mobile broadband being provided by the leading cellular carriers from around the world and the United States, that is going to be the center of the corporate strategies and the connecting society. There are very few things that you want to leave home without in the morning when you head off to work or head off for your big day. And I would say your connectivity is one thing you don't want to leave behind. Thank you for your time, and again, I look forward to the questions on the panel.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris, very much. We are going to move on to Interdigital and Chris Cave.
Thanks, Kelly, for inviting me to this webinar. It's a pleasure to participate. So I'll start with a quick introduction on Interdigital. We're an advanced technology company that's been pioneering in the field of wireless communications for more than 4 decades now. We've made significant contributions to the definition of 2G, 3G, 4G mobile systems, and we're now fully engaged in the design of the next generation 5G systems. And our R&D team consists of many advanced researchers that work through our various locations in the US, Canada, the UK, and South Korea. So next slide, please. Now, if we try to figure out what to expect in 2016. I think Chris, right before me, touched upon quite a few of these points, but looking at LTE Advanced Pro and NB-IoT, we expect that some initial trials for LTE Advanced Pro and NB-IoT Release 13 could start in 2016, but we also anticipate that these will continue to evolve from a standards development standpoint as well throughout Release 14 next year. Some of the hot features for Release 13, LTE Advanced Pro, would be LAA, where we're utilizing LTE and unlicensed spectrum as a capacity boost, LTE Category 0 or Category M for deploying LTE as a low-cost machine-type communications technology, and I'd say also LTE and Wi-Fi integration, which is important to many operators as well as another means to sort of offload some of their traffic. On the right-hand side here, we also show the NB-IoT, which is a new radio technology being standardized in 3GPP, and this is really targeting the very low data rate machine-type communications market. We're seeing a lot of significant demand there, and we think that a lot of companies are going to rush to get this to market as quickly as possible. Okay, moving on to the next slide. I think the key thing here as a big thing to look forward to in 2016 is just the overall kickoff of the studies towards a new 5G radio interface, right? It's going to be a long process. It's going to take up until 2020 for the industry and 3GPP and various organizations to nail this down. But next year will be particularly important because that's where we start our studies and that's where we identify sort of the basic building blocks for future 5G systems. Okay, on that note, I will pass on to Justin.
Okay, great, and we will be going to Justin Hart of Sonus. I do want to take the opportunity to tell our audience we will be taking questions, so please submit them through the user interface. After Justin's presentation, we'll start to tackle some of those. So Justin, please tell us about Sonus's perspective on 2016.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to participate in the discussion today. If we could just move to the next slide, please. So just a little bit of background around Sonus Networks. We've been around for about 15 years now, and we are really in the voice and video and UC space, delivering sessions from the access network through to the core of the network. And we sell primarily to carriers and large enterprises. It's a technology that takes sessions securely from the access side over into the core of the network. And so from a wireless perspective, this would typically be seen in the VoLTE space, but we have been used for a long time and happened to transition legacy networks such as 3G and PSTN networks over into the IP space as well. As the industry is transitioning, we're moving more and more into the virtualization space using NFV technology to bring technology over into the cloud infrastructure so that we can do this at more elastic and more dynamic sort of networks and scales. Also, as we see more and more technology and more infrastructure move into the IP space, more and more sessions go over IP, the actual intelligence within the network becomes more and more critical. So being able to take the session awareness of knowledge of an actual session and transition that and make the network more aware of what's going on at a session level is really important. So we're seeing more and more SDN activity as well. So that's the essence of what Sonus is focused on from its history perspective. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So just some themes that we expect to see going into the next year. So we're seeing wireless networks evolve at different paces. So although we've spoken a little about the transition from 4G to 5G so far, 3G is also still going to be around for a period of time, and we expect to see a mixed mode networks where the access technology is dependent on both the handset and the amount of evolution the network's gone through, which makes some complexity in the core because you have to deal with a range of different access environments. But as more and more sessions and more traffic moves over to IP, opens up much more opportunity to drive more divergent and more complex types of sessions, more multimedia. So we're seeing much more UC happening, both from traditional methods like the evolution of the GSMA standards through RCS, but also new modal types of communication such as WebRTC, which starts to merge between over-the-top networks and carrier networks. We're also seeing networks evolve how they're actually built and how they're constructed, and moving away from purpose-built hardware and purpose-built solutions into more generic and off-the-shelf COTS hardware, paralleling what's happening in the cloud, and more virtualization happening. And as more and more traffic is starting to go through these networks, as the bandwidth from the access starts to increase, it's becoming increasingly important to be able to actually program the networks and understand how to prioritize traffic, how to shift capacity around the networks, and how to ensure you're getting the most out of the IP infrastructure you have. So we're seeing programmable networks begin to take up as well, which merges both from the virtualization on the NFV side, but also in the SDN space. And with that, I'll hand back.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you all. We're going to start to get into our question discussion now. Again, audience, we would love to have questions coming from you. Now, I want to start off with Chris Cave. I wanted to jump back to you. You talked a little bit, actually, several of our presenters have talked a little bit about the standardization of 5G and how, we're going to start seeing study items and the beginning of that process in the coming year. What use cases do you think are going to be prioritized in some of those early stages of standardization?
Right, that's a great question, and I think the industry, and specifically in 3GPP, is debating that right now. Right, there's three big families of use cases, enhanced mobile broadband being one, the other one being called mission critical devices, which is sort of this ultra low latency, ultra reliable type communication, and then the third one is massive machine type communications. I think from a prioritization point of view, there seems to be a little more sort of headwind going to, or sort of momentum going towards enhanced mobile broadband as the first use case. I think if you refer back to one of my slides that showed the expected timeline for standardization, we're expecting to see this to happen in two phases. Phase one for early commercialization in 2020, and then phase two being the final 5G standard submitted to ITUR. We think that in phase one, the focus will be more on enhanced mobile broadband.
Okay, great. Anybody else want to jump on what they think some of the initial 5G use cases will be?
Well, this is Chris Pearson. I think he said it quite well. I think some of the things that are being looked at for 5G as well, like the big massive machine-to-machine or IoT opportunity, I think there's a lot of work being done, as I mentioned in mine, on narrowband IoT, and there has been a lot of work done in the last year. So even though that is a critical item on 5G opportunity, I think there also is the knowledge that there's a lot of work being done already from the narrowband IoT and LTE-M, category 0, category 1, lots of things that have been done. So, I think those are the three main areas, as he mentioned, though.
Okay, great. We did have an audience question on how interference mitigation would be handled in LTE-U unlicensed. I did want to clarify there's actually two different approaches to that, and that's part of the controversy that's going on over that topic right now. You have LAA, or License Assisted Access, which is actually part of Release 13. That relies on a listen before talk mechanism to make sure that it plays fairly with Wi-Fi. And then you also have the LTE-U standard being developed through the LTE-U forum with Verizon, Qualcomm, and some other companies. And that's a bit more proprietary in terms of the technology that it relies on. I think as we start to see LTE-U equipment hit the market, we'll see more testing in that area. But my understanding is that primarily it relies on Qualcomm's carrier adaptive sensing technology, as well as duty cycling, in order to address interference issues there. So let's jump back to Justin, and I wanted to talk about whether you see NFV or SDN gaining more traction going into 2016. Maybe we can start off with how you see each of them being distinct from one another, because I think there's a lot of sort of terminology overlap in how people see those.
Sure, and let's start by trying to define the terms a little bit more succinctly. So NFV really is about the movement of what was previously purpose-built hardware-based applications into virtualized infrastructure, and the term has really been driven by ETSI predominantly, so network function virtualization. So this is taking whether it's aspects of the MSC or RAN or EPC or VoLTE infrastructure and moving that to run just in pure software on COTS hardware. And SDN is really about taking the control plane from switches and routers and making that more flexible and more programmable and abstracting that out of the hardware so that you can control those components of the IP infrastructure from other applications and third-party applications riding on top of that. So the two technologies are sometimes used together, but they're really two different changes within the infrastructure itself. I think you're going to see just to the other part of your question about 2016, I think you'll see both technologies progress in 2016. In our experience, NFE is definitely ahead. There's a lot more carriers already starting to use NFE in their environments. SDN's kind of really been focused in early deployments more at the bandwidth optimization and companies that are looking to sell bandwidth as a service, and it's been less adopted within the core of the VoLTE networks yet. But I think you'll start to see that change in 2016, and certainly we get into a stride. There's some discussions to be had around exactly which protocols and which aspects of OpenFlow and the various standards will really be taken up, but that will shake out in the industry over the next year.
Okay, great. Martha, we've had a few questions come in terms of workforce, and since you covered those sections of the report, I wanted to put those to you. You know, somebody asked what company or type of company would be an example of being included as not previously part of the traditional wireless ecosystem. And then we also had another question about. Actually, well, let's just start there and talk about, you know, what companies might not be traditionally wireless that will be getting more into wireless.
Yeah, I think that there are two different types of companies. Primarily, I think it's the IT type installer companies that work in building. Perhaps the people who work for these companies have more of a background in Wi-Fi, but now with a lot of small cell deployments, these people are needing to learn a little bit about RF engineering. At the same time, you know, RF engineers are being asked to understand Wi-Fi a little bit more as these two technologies need to work together in buildings. So I think that when you talk to some of the equipment vendors and infrastructure service providers, they say that they are looking for people who, again, have an IT background and are comfortable pulling cable and fiber in building as opposed to climbing a tower. So that's kind of what's meant by new types of companies that are not traditionally part of the wireless ecosystem. And oftentimes, of course, these are local companies, maybe not companies that would be household names. And then on the outdoor front, I think that the companies that have bucket trucks driving around working for the utilities are now hearing from Verizon. Maybe they're even they are hearing from Google, and right now it's Google Fiber, but who knows what's next with Google. So these companies are also on the brink of becoming part of wireless, I think.
Okay, great. And I don't know if you want to follow that up with talking a little bit about maybe what parts of the industry, that we might see adding jobs. I don't know if there are specific titles or just sort of generally, which parts of the industry we might see contract versus add.
Well, again, I think that it seems likely that boots on the ground installing work will be very active in the year ahead, perhaps more so than some of the infrastructure suppliers or even at the carriers. Specifically, I think with the chip vendors, we've seen some contraction, and so perhaps that's an area where there's not as much growth. But then when you get into the deployments themselves, we do see an uptick. The infrastructure service providers that some of them did have to lay off in 2015, those same companies are now saying that they're starting to hire again. So that's very good news.
Okay, great. Chris Pearson, I want to jump back to you to talk a little bit about, as far as the Americas, what kind of progress you expect to see in 2016 for LTE and LTE Advanced.
Yeah, I think in Latin America, for instance, we've seen a great progress in the actual number of deployments and number of countries in 2015. In 2016, I think you'll see continued deployment progress where you're hitting a lot more of the Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. So one of the challenges, though, in Latin America for that progress is the regulatory processes to get, for cell siting, to try and even trying to get more spectrum for LTE deployments. So that's the challenge down there. In North America, I think our deployment by all of our national carriers is very good, obviously. But the progress I think you'll see is in LTE Advanced, where right now LTE Advanced, even in North America, is really one feature, which is the carrier aggregation. What you're going to see is more and more of operators looking to deploy with their vendor partners the other features of LTE Advanced that are part of one of my slides that I referenced. So operators are looking to improve their networks and their capabilities, and I think some of those features of LTE Advanced in North America will help them.
Okay. Chris Cave, I wanted to ask you about that as well. If there are particular features maybe in, that Release 13 LTE Advanced Pro that you think are going to get early market support.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of talk about LAA, and even in the report you produce, you highlight LTE-U LAA. I think that's a particularly attractive feature for any wireless operator that wants to offload some of its traffic without having to purchase spectrum, or that are not able to purchase additional licensed spectrum. And then the second one I saw that I highlighted earlier was just LTE Category 0, or what some companies are starting to call Cat M, and then also just narrowband IoT. I think a lot of companies, especially the traditional 3GPP operators, are looking to diversify their revenue streams. They really want to make sure they get in strong into this IoT market. They're feeling some competition, but from some companies that are using proprietary solutions like Sigfox, which I think you mentioned earlier on. And so I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to look out for in 2016.
Okay. Roger, I want to jump back to you and ask a little bit about, we've been touching on LTE-U quite a bit. Do you have perspective on what we're likely to see? You mentioned it a little bit in your slide. I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about, a little bit more about that topic and what we should expect.
Well, I think we should expect more trials in 16 and maybe even 17. I think we will see a lot of lobbying in Washington, but I think it would be an extremely stark and negative departure from the current path if the FCC would listen to people who want to make certain spectrum pieces dependent and exclusive to one technology. Would be very stifling for innovation. So ultimately, I think we will see LTE-U or LAA deployed in this country as a way of using additional spectrum and taking off some of the pressure that we have in the in markets where we have constrained spectrum, and that's the biggest market. So I think it will come. It will just take, I would look at 17 for actual deployments for LTE-U or LAA.
Okay. We actually had an interesting question here from our audience about LTE. When will LTE replace prior generation networks or achieve full geographic population coverage so we can drop the cost of 2G and 3G network fallback? Now, if I remember correctly from the recent LTE North America conference, there was a very interesting presentation by Sonos in terms of their thoughts on sunsetting networks and both 2G and 3G being around for a considerable time frame. Chris, I think you also talked about some of the projection numbers and that LTE, if I believe, was only going to get to maybe 70 or 80% of the world's population by 2020. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I don't have the information right in front of me right now, but yeah, I mean, what you're seeing is GSM and HSPA and LTE when you look at the worldwide market, will be around for a long time. And LTE is the fastest deployed mobile broadband technology in our history, and it is expected to get to approximately 70% of population coverage by 2020. and so that is a significant progress from where it was only a couple of years ago, which was in the double digits. So yeah, we expect to see LTE continue to progress, but you also will have HSBA coverage and GSM coverage in many covering most of the population as well.
Okay, Justin, did you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah, I just have one more comment, which is when you look at 3G to 4G.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. When you look at 3G to 4G migration, there's really two factors there as well that you need to think about. One is who's the impact on? So if you have a lot of 3G around, it's for two reasons. One is that you have a lot of 3G end users that still require that service, or you have it because you've got geographic coverage issues with 4G that you haven't been able to resolve yet. For the former, you can carry on dealing with that route through your legacy MSC infrastructure and just sunset that over time. For the latter, if it's down to coverage and geographic coverage, you have more complexity in the network because you end up having to have 4G handsets that can hand over between 4G and back to legacy 3G networks, which just adds more complexity to the network. So the industry is motivated to move on to 4G. It certainly is going to happen. But from a carrier perspective, there's definitely some pain to go through until we get there.
Okay. Roger, did you have thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, and I think, well, one of the complications, the carriers want to shut down or shut off 2G networks as quickly as they can. The problem is that the handset replacement cycle has slowed down. So a larger proportion of their customer base remains on older devices that are relying on that. Mm-hmm. I think several of the carriers, I think Verizon said, and that they will stop selling devices with 3G in the next couple of years. That is like that first clear step that gets people to increasingly off the older networks. I think it will be still several years before we can completely shut down the 2G networks, but you're seeing already today that more and more of the 2G and even 3G capacity and bandwidth is being shut down and being moved over as the traffic moves over. And when you're looking at the numbers that the carriers are giving out every quarter, X percentage of my traffic is on LTE. Once this goes into the 90-95% plus region, you will see, maybe only one channel left for as like a fallback, and then ultimately it will shut off. But in a way they've complicated that by going to EIP plans.
Yeah, Chris Pearson, one thing to remember is that the North American market for LTE is quite progressive compared to most parts of the world. When you look at some of the regions, Latin America, Africa, even Eastern Europe, a lot of the traffic is definitely not on LTE yet. Whereas North America, yeah, we have some amazing trends of leadership in LTE at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Martha, we did have a question from our audience. Could you clarify what was the centralized RAN that you defined? And I thought this was an interesting distinction in your sections of the report. So maybe you can go over that.
Sure. Yeah, the word CRAN is used a lot, and that is used to refer both to centralized RAN and cloud RAN. And centralized RAN usually means radio access network equipment that is not co-located with the antennas that it serves. Often it's located in a less expensive place than the place that is being served by, for example, a DAS, and fiber would be used to connect to the nodes. Cloud RAN is the same idea. However, typically the equipment might be perhaps even further away and not as controlled by the mobile operator. So in a centralized RAN deployment, for example, Verizon is centralizing the RAN that it's using for a small cell rollout in San Francisco. And the locations are undisclosed for security reasons, but they are far away from the actual small cells. Fiber is used to connect, but of course Verizon controls all the equipment, all the brains of the network. In a Cloud RAN situation, which I'm much less familiar with, and I don't know about a lot of actual deployments of Cloud RAN, but that describes a situation where I think that the end user of the equipment has less control over the RAN equipment. So, it's in the cloud. So I hope that gives some more information to help answer that question.
Okay, great. I wanted to, several of you touched on IoT as a major trend for 2016. Chris, let's talk a little bit, you jumped into this. I want to give you a little bit more time to talk about, what are some of your expectations for that space? It sounds like we should expect great momentum in the next year.
Yeah, I think that, there's two things.
Which Chris are you referring to?
I'm sorry, Chris Pearson. My apologies.
Yeah, so some of the things I think that, and perhaps we can both answer it. What I see is the progress being made when it comes to, vertical industries and what I would even say just corporate strategies of starting to think outside the box about how their industry are working and what they're, looking to accomplish by connecting, everything in their business, and obviously connecting with their customers, but connecting vertical channels, vertical pieces of their industry. So what I would say is I see a great momentum to thinking outside the box and seeing more industries interested in IoT. On the other side, I see that I really think that our industry, the mobile broadband wireless industry, and 3GPP is working extremely hard to address the various, again, cost, complexity, battery life, all the kind of different trade-offs that are out there in the industry, and they're looking to work hard on this and make progress quickly because they see, number one, that there's a lot of competition, but number two, that if they can actually come up with some really good solutions to this, that the market is just staggering, gigantic when it comes to what can be done. So my idea is that IoT marches on both in the progress of the standard as well as the progress of vertical industries and corporate strategies opening their minds and wallets to the connectivity item.
Okay. Martha, do you have thoughts on this? You talked to quite a few people about this topic.
Well, I would agree that the verticals are becoming much more interested and that they're starting to recognize the payoff. And I think that a lot of them are going to see that payoff through the data that they can collect as they connect devices. I think that that's where the real value may be for a lot of industries that start connecting their devices to the internet. And interestingly, I think that a lot of startups that were once just mobile application makers are migrating towards monitoring and measurement, and now they're becoming sort of IoT companies, an app that can connect something to the internet, collect data, and then while that data may not mean much in the aggregate with a lot of other data, it does begin to tell a story.
Okay. Okay. Chris Cave of Interdigital, we did have a question for you in that in one of your slides you highlighted a lower module cost than currently. Our audience member was wondering if you could give an approximate range with, and he said that Zigbee and Bluetooth are down in the cents, Wi-Fi in the single dollar range. Were you referring to various technologies? Were you referring to LTE specifically?
Well, from a cost perspective, I don't think I can give a sort of a specific number at this point. We have to wait until the chipset vendors come out and actually have products available in the market. I think the target is somewhere in the sub $5 range, I would say, for some of the LTE Cat 0 or Cat M type of modems. Okay. I think another piece of that sort of analysis to look at is the infrastructure cost as well, right? So it's important to have very low module costs because obviously we're expecting billions of these connected devices. But one of the big advantages that LTE or 3GPP based technologies have is the infrastructure is already deployed, and most changes going forward to support this IoT may be able to be supported with simple software upgrades on the infrastructure side. And so that is a significant advantage compared to some of the other competing technologies where if somebody wants to set up an IoT service, a connectivity service, they don't only need to have low module costs, they also have to find a way to deploy the network infrastructure in a cost-effective manner.
Well, and they're going to have a lot of choices, it sounds like, in terms of what their options are going to be. Narrowband LTE, say that sort of low power wide area network, Sigfox type offering. That's going to make for some interesting business decisions, I think. So, well, let's wrap up with one more question for all of our panelists. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of give us, your top trends to watch for telecom in the coming year. And Roger, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. Well, I think the interesting trend next year is going to be, carrier competition and how all the carriers have now largely taken different positionings, and their approach to wireless has become quite divergent, and it's going to be interesting which of these different philosophical approaches will win out.
Okay, Martha, your thoughts on top trends for 2016?
I think maybe convergence, wireless and wireline convergence is a trend to watch. I think that is the way a lot of end users look at connectivity. They don't necessarily care whether they're connected wirelessly or Ethernet or how. They just want to be connected all the time. And I think that as the industry begins to move in that direction, we're likely to see perhaps more interesting partnerships and more mergers and acquisitions.
Okay. Justin, your thoughts on top trends for 2016?
Yeah, I think it's really going to be about carriers responding to the business challenges they see from competitive environments such as over-top internet companies providing communication services and things of that nature that they need to fight against. So I think you're going to see carriers start to look at how they build their networks, how they do that more efficiently, more dynamically, and with more intelligence in the network to make sure that they're more capable of rolling out services with agility and with speed to be more competitive and be more efficient.
Okay, great. Chris Cave.
Yeah, well, I think we'll see some very interesting things in terms of what carriers do in terms of deployments next year. But from my perspective, really the big buzz for 2016 will be on the start of 5G. I think the whole industry gets excited when we embark in the definition of a new generation. That's a big thing. I think you're going to see a lot of the investment going there. Talked a bit about some jobs earlier. I think there's some companies hiring to increase their R&D efforts towards 5G, and overall I think that's an exciting thing that's going to take place next year.
Okay, and Chris Pearson, we'll end with you and your thoughts. Looking forward to the top trends for the year.
I think three quick things. One, the progress of LTE Advanced around the world. Two, the progress of the Internet of Things and what it means to new companies that never thought of it before as well. And then finally, just agreeing with the last panelist, the progress of 5G activities, both pre-standard and even within 3GPP.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you to all of our participants today. Thank you to our audience. And don't forget that special report is available for download today. Thank you so much.